Fight, Win, Beyond the Election Cycle. On behalf of the Band Scholars Project at UC Berkeley, I'd like to introduce myself and introduce some of the work that we're doing before I introduce this amazing event and panel. I'm Professor Tiana Paschal, Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley, and I'm so excited to be here right down the street from where I live at EastSide Arts Alliance. I'm going to start with some thank yous. First, I'd like to thank Charisse and Jodi, our Band Scholar Fellows at UC Berkeley, and Rupa, Steven, and Tongo for also joining us in this amazing event. I also want to thank Derrica Purnell, who due to unforeseeable circumstances could not be with us today. I know that we'll continue to be in conversation with her as we do this work. I'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Spencer Foundation for their financial support. Thank you to the good people of EastSide Arts Alliance. And to Bandung Books for supporting this event, including Suzanne Takehara and at EastSide and Michaela Payton at Bandung Books. We would like to thank our co-sponsors at UC Berkeley. This includes a lot of folks because this work brings a lot of people together. The Departments of Gender and Women's Studies and Ethnic Studies, the Center for Race and Gender, and the Institute for the Study of Social Issues. I'd also like to thank Chair Eula Taylor for all of her stewarding us on the righteous path always, and to Michael Cohen, who also dreamed this up as a project and could not be here tonight. And most importantly, I would like to thank the phenomenal Barbara Montano, who, in addition to her kind of bureaucratic administrative skills, also brings an ethics of care to the work and makes sure that we live by the principles that we try to as we implement the work that we dream up in institutions that are hostile to it, I should say. Okay. So the Band Scholars Project is dedicated to supporting the work of US-based scholars working on issues of race, gender, and Black studies who are directly confronting this rising attack on freedom of speech, academic freedom, and really the study of everything that we hold dear. Because we seek not to just defend public higher education, but the very principle of an educated public, we have sought out ways, working with our Band Scholar Fellows, to expand our programming beyond the confines of the elite university and reach out to local communities, activists, and organizers, all of which brings us to this beautiful, beautiful place tonight in East Oakland. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing panelists this evening so that we can get started. First, our very own alum, Dr. Charisse Burden-Stelly, CBS. Charisse was on actually you were the student representative on the committee that hired me for this job, and so it's been pretty amazing to start, to have this job and to see you just soar and do such important work while also staying grounded in the grassroots, and I really, really love watching that and feel very proud. Charisse received her PhD from African Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley, and she's held a sequence of very prestigious postdocs and fellowships. She's currently an associate professor of African American Studies at Wayne State in Detroit. She's the author of 2 books, Black Scare, Red Scare, Theorizing Capitalist Racism in the United States, published in 2023, and co-author with Gerald Horne of W.E.B. Du Bois, A Life of American History, published in 2019. She, along with Jodi Dean, edited Organized Fight Win, Black Communist Women's Political Writings. She is a major public intellectual, and her work in organizing has been recognized and appeared in so many different places in academic and public-facing journals. And she's literally been on damn near every podcast and YouTube channel that is worth watching and listening to. Jodi Dean is a professor of politics at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, New York. She is the author and editor of more than a dozen books on political theory and cultural studies. More recently, Jodi has been the author of a trilogy of books, the first The Communist Horizon, Crowds and Party, and Comrade, which offer the helpful reminder that, quote, anyone, but not everyone, can be a comrade, unquote. In April of 2024, Jodi formally earned the title of Band Scholar when she was removed from teaching responsibilities for a post she authored on the Verso blog about Palestinian resistance. In addition to co-editing Organized Fight When, Jodi has a new book coming out very soon entitled Capital's Grave, Neo-Feudalism and the New Class Struggle. Welcome, welcome. Our third panelist is Rupa Marya, who is a literal rock star in the world of actual music, but also medicine and activism. She is a professor of medicine at UC San Francisco, where she practices and teaches internal medicine. She's the co-author with Raj Patel of Inflame, Deep Medicine, and the Anatomy of Injustice. And she is the founder of the Do No Harm Coalition, which formed a collective of healthcare workers seeking to fight disease through structural change. And she helped found the Deep Medicine Circle and the Farming is Medicine program, which works with women of color to heal the wounds of colonialism through food, story, and land rematriation. She has also toured the world with her band, Rupa and the April Fishes. Welcome. Steven Osuna could not be here today because of the storm, but is here virtually. Thank you so much for joining us. Steven Osuna is a professor of sociology at Cal State Long Beach, where he teaches on policing and criminology, Latino and Caribbean studies, and race and political economy. His work has appeared in American Quarterly, Race and Class, and many, many other scholarly outlets. You can also read his work in two major recent anthologies, including his interview with Alex Sanchez in Policing the Planet and the essay Class Suicide, the Black Radical Tradition, Radical Scholarship, and the Neoliberal Turn in the Futures of Black Radicalism. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Tongo Eisen-Martin, who will start us out tonight in a second. Originally from San Francisco, Tongo is an author, educator, organizer, poet, and author of the curriculum on extrajudicial killings of Black people, We Charge Genocide Again, and the books that are multiple award-winning books, Someone's Dead Already, Heaven is All, Goodbyes, Waiting Behind Tornadoes for Food, and Blood on the Fog. In 2020, he co-founded Black Freighter Press to publish revolutionary works. He was San Francisco's 8th Poet Laureate and was gracious enough to join us tonight on the panel. He's also going to start us out, so I'm going to give Tongo the mic. Welcome, Tongo, and thank you.
Has anybody seen that roast, that Emmitt Smith roast, where the guy was up there trying to tell jokes and then Jamie Foxx said, "This is your conscience." That's how I feel right now. Not Jamie Foxx, the other one. I go to the railroad tracks and follow them to the station of my enemies. A cobalt-toothed man pitches pennies at my mugshot negative. All over the United States, there are toddlers in the route. I see why everyone out here got the big cosmic basket, and why blood agreements mean a lot, and why I get shot back at. I understand the psycho-spiritual refusal to write white history or take the glass freeway. White skin tattooed on my right forearm, ricochet sewers near where I collapsed into a rat-infested manhood. My new existence is living graffiti. In the kitchen with a lot of gun cylinders to hack up, house of God in part, no cops in part, my body brings down to Christmas. The new bullets pray over blankets made from the old bullets, pray over the 28th hour's next beauty mark, extrajudicial Confederate statue restoration, the waistband before the next protest post. Hey, by the way, time is not an illusion, Your Honor. I will save your deaths for last. You're a witty, Your Honor. You're moving money again, Your Honor. It's only raining one thing. Non-white cops, And prison guard shadows reminded me of spoiled milk flowing on an oil spill. A neighborhood making a lot of fuss over its demise. A new late for a Black Panther party. Malcolm X's ballroom jacket slung over my son's shoulder. The figment of village, a new news to a new white preacher. All in an abstract painting for president. Bought slavery some time, didn't it? The tantrum screeches of military bolts and election Tuesday cars, a cold-blooded study in leg irons, proof that some white people have actually found a nooses. As sundown couples made their vows over opaque peach plastic and bold action audiences, the mega every second is definitely my favorite law of science. Final news clippings and primitive Methodists, my arm chains imperialisms, simple policing versus structural frenzies, elementary school script versus even wider white spectrums, artless bleeding, and the challenge of watching civilians stake at terrible rituals they have around the corner. They let their elders beg for public mercy. I'm gonna go ahead and sharpen these kids' heads and their elders myself and see how much gravy spills out of family crest, modern fans of well, with a t-shirt poem and t-shirt guilt, and me having on the cheapest pair of shoes on the bus. I have no choice but to read the city walls, the signs of my life. These little societies, they wander together like hopeful drops of a virus. Citizen testaments bent on offering me a nation of breadwinners to hold me back like it's a brick. I wrinkle the concrete sometimes like flesh. My Martin Luther King permanence turned away from a podium into the reeds like God is a dangerous twin. Black artists to the mountaintop balcony on my bedroom floor. You know they steal you from the earth itself and suspend you in your broken neck from their foolish euphoria. From the loyalty over their great superstition, loyalty over their grand reform, I return to my mother completely disrespected. For peeling the heat off of purgatory, they killed poets like me. Walk me away from my poems, never to be heard from again. And in this final industrial complex, the bloodlines picked over, picked through. A sport and spiritual death, where your definitely's half made, police become a pretty word. I'm reading a lynch mob shoestrings like they were tea leaves, teaching you how to write about cities. It's the 25th century in America, people. Tyranny against your chump change. You're a chump to be mocked even with a gun in your car. A cubit of needlework spelled tune for the proletariat, the relapse ministry. Talented people curled up in a fetal position next to a diamond dime. Just another service day in the theatrics of tea house fascism. In a bouquet of surveillance cameras, in the poverty of God, new blue eyes, courses of water, a newly piloted presidency, one big shiny coin if they ask animated capitalism, another non-literal voice killing his white freedom, the deification of hyphens, medicine bread and picture shows, great protests in LA, guests of our ink, drop kicking rolls in the graveyard, DC mink like a stone torn in half, the pin advances, despite CIA guideposts, despite non-African past and futures, a metaphorical but not surreal day in the horn-ridden life, horn player improvising king, like a radio prize fight featuring Shango himself, a real hand sweeps the land of racism, now return to the ground, now make progress with the gun. On our mother Emmanuel, they put on music that evening, a swinging type body language for you to drink with fermented $5 bills, for your body language some applause. My past stomach lining, neither a good thing nor a bad thing like being psychic on the way to a lethal injection. It'll sit you down with Lady Day. Lady Day leading you who surrendered their souls to Africa too soon. Potty thoughts floating in the cup of water she saved me, accessing my stomach, accessing the love of the American lynch. Coast these wooden avalanches to the wrist, our mother Emmanuel avalanches to the sharp piece, pain, or the deal you make with pain. A piano makes sense to them, laying hands on the world gradually, addressing the bending necks on the streets of the north, child saving in pain, repeating pain in the north, tear trigger fingers on that piano, if harmony would have me, putting 100 fights on every direction offered. The Lady Day laying on trees again, recouping the countryside itself, saying, lay your planet on this lightning, make your poems a point of pocket of man. Shit, I greeted the blues itself. America may clean my dead body, but will never include me. There goes the poet. Killing without killing. Never mind this little painting of your language. May I be a meaningful lynching. A crow's passing. Good and dead by the afternoon.
All right, so I'm gonna sort of run point on our panel conversation tonight. So basically the format is each of us came up with a question to pose to the other panelists. So those of us whose question it is won't respond to the question. We have 5 questions, 5 panelists, and then we'll open it up to you all. So to my fellow panelists, I know that academics and adjacent academics can be rather loquacious, so wrap it up. Thorough but succinct, please, so that we can get to all the questions and so that we can engage with our comrades and audience. So we'll start with my question. Question 1. The Trump administration is off to a goofy ass and chaotic start, terrorizing undocumented folks, waging economic warfare through tariffs, attacking racialized folks in higher education and industry through the racist weaponization of DEI, using anti-communist and anti-radical language to sow confusion, and so on and so on and so on. Yet much of this architecture for this assault was laid by the previous administration through both action and inaction, like funding genocide in Gaza, railroading the Uhuru 3, attacking African Stream, intensifying the suffering of Cuba, deporting more people than any president in history, failing to codify Roe, and so on and so on. So my question is this: what forms of political education are you engaging in, or do you recommend, to illuminate these continuities and to challenge the idea that the Republican Party or even Trump is some unique evil solely responsible for our abysmal material conditions? And are there antagonisms or contradictions that are particular to this particular moment that require new or different strategies and tactics? An easy one, a softball to start. Oh, okay, so we're gonna, the order for this one will go Jodi, Steven, Rupa, Tongo.
It's just arbitrary. I also noticed, Charisse, that earlier it was like, you could only ask one question and you actually snuck several into this one, but anyway.
My rules.
All right, I'm gonna answer this really literally, which is what forms of political education are you engaging in, and do you recommend as part of the current condition? And also a shout out to my PSL comrades. Thank you all for coming this evening. I live in Geneva, New York, and with a group of my comrades there, we actually began a 3-month, in a small unit, a 3-month study of fascism and of the different writings, particularly in the Marxist tradition on fascism. And we did that in part so that we weren't going to be pushed around by the rhetoric used by the Democrats and the kind of hysteria that filters so much throughout the mainstream media, but that we would be clear in what our analysis would look like. And so we spent a few months doing that, and it wasn't just that education part. There was an extra element, which is we also used that opportunity to try to put together a very approachable education series that we could take to a bunch of the different communities in our region in upstate New York, so that it wasn't going to be just us talking to each other. It was going to be, how do we prepare a set of clear ideas that we can take to different people in the different communities around Rochester, Syracuse, and some of the smaller towns. And so what I think so to me the more abstract answer then is, what kind of study is study that's clarifying, and study together with comrades, and study that aims to try to reach out and meet other people.
Great. Steven.
Hi, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, great. Nice to see y'all. I'm so sorry I can't be there. This rain not dealing with. Unfortunately, the flight got delayed. So I'm here by component day, but happy to be here with y'all. So I think about that question about political education, something I learned from my comrades in El Salvador that has always stayed with me is the importance of historical memory. That in whatever we do, whatever kind of organizing we do, and the kind of politics that we do, you always have to have that historical memory in mind, right? If you think about the Trump administration right now, and I think about my students, for example, I teach at Cal State Long Beach, probably teaching school. A lot of my students don't know about the Obama era. It's as if they forgot, or no one ever told them about it. And they have this common sense idea of who Obama was, rather than us thinking of him as the deporter in chief, the drone striker, like this person that we all know, those of us that are organizing at that time, wasn't what people think of him as today. Right now, today, people watch him on Netflix and hear his voice and think like, oh, I think he has a show talking about nature, rather than understanding what he did, how he led the conditions to where we're at today. Right? So I think the importance of having that historical memory, of understanding how he got to this point today, is very crucial. The next point to think about is one of Trump's campaign nights, things that he's been saying is this idea that his campaign his presidency is a common sense presidency. And I think this, for us, really as radicals and critical scholars and people that are organizing, we really have to think about Antonio Gramsci's idea of common sense. Like how is this idea of common sense being shaped in the narrative initiated by the Trump administration, but not only the Trump administration, liberals. Because how are liberals shaping the narrative of our resistance, right? I could get more into it, like, I wasn't gonna bring shit up, but like, for example, people are telling us that we have to support DEI and USAID, right? That, oh my God, we're defunding that thing. We shouldn't be doing that. For us on the left, we're like, hell yeah, do it. Get rid of it. Right? Unfortunately, the common sense narrative that's being built is that we need to defend those, and then we need to fight for those things. Rather than fighting for working class struggle, working class housing conditions, conditions of the working class and education, right? So I think the idea of Gramsci's common sense, and he had this idea that common sense is contradictory, that there's a lot of things that just flow in the everyday common sense of people. And our role as intellectuals and people organizing is to unpack that common sense, to turn that common sense into a good sense, meaning a sense that we think about how do we fight for an alternative, how we continue to fight for an alternative, right? And more importantly, I think that in our struggles, in the things that we're doing, we kind of keep the idea of capitalism and imperialism at the forefront. A lot of our organizing that we're doing oftentimes, that gets left out. You know, I'm part of a California Faculty Association. I'm a union member of my university. And every time that we're talking about issues, well, that's the one word that doesn't come up, capitalism or imperialism. And it took a long time for our union to even push for a ceasefire statement, right? So because the idea was that our issues are not international, our issues are local. So how do we make sure that our organizing maintains the internationalist outlook?
Thank you.
And again, you know, in the previous the Trump administration, you know, we kept pushing for this idea that people wake up, and it's just our role at this time to how do we get those people that are waking up because they are to the problems of the world and get them to have a better analysis, push a better analysis. And that's, I think a lot of us that are organizing and teaching and doing this work that's our job to really get involved and get our hands dirty.
Thank you. All right, Rupa.
Thank you. So this question is a great question. So I'm a band scholar right now. I was suspended in September 2024 for my Palestine advocacy. I've been harassed for over a year before then. And my political education right now is really coming from understanding how, and maybe this is because I'm an artist as well, that my experience as a physician, as a healthcare worker, speaking out against a genocide that has targeted the healthcare system in Gaza, that has targeted and killed healthcare workers there and silenced us here. I'm starting to understand the way empire is working on this scale with these tentacles of power. So learning from that and exposing, and going in and exposing, okay, why is a California State Senator, Scott Wiener, who is receiving funding from the Diller family, that is the largest funder of UCSF, and the Diller family makes their money off of housing in the Bay. They're the largest corporate residential real estate landlord in the Bay. So they're able to determine market rates. So how is this family putting people in tents from here in San Francisco and Oakland, and then sending their money to Israel to fund West Bank settlements, to fund Islamophobic and racist institutions? What are these intricacies of power? So we have this Diller Foundation, we have this California State Senator who positions himself like LGBTQ climate washing person. So really working on the identitarian aspect while he's destroying working class people's lives in the Bay Area through housing, okay? And so when we look at how our housing is controlled by these billionaires that are sending money in Israel to fund a genocide, we look at the same thing with farming. So what we can look at from our particular situations here, how are people in here not getting access to healthcare, not getting access to housing, not getting access to food, not getting access to education? And in each of these places, we're seeing a choke point of the billionaire class determining who can say what in what space, how it's said, controlling the movement of capital and resources, and that money going out to Israel, while people here, working class people, don't get access to healthcare. So this is a critical moment when a CEO of a healthcare insurance company gets shot in broad daylight in Manhattan. I've never seen more unity across the board. And that to me really speaks of an important point. And no, that point is not like, let's go start murdering people. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying it's an important point where people recognize, people are connecting the dots. And for me, as someone who is talking about racist police violence as a material problem for health in the Bay Area, when George Floyd was killed and people were throwing colonizer statues into the Bay, I'm like, people are connecting the dots historically. So this is a time to really help people see those dots, help people see the relationship between class, material support for people here. No. So North Carolina, no federal relief. $8 billion out to Israel to murder Palestinian children, to destroy their health care. The Diller family puts people in tents here. They put people in tents in Gaza, right? So once we start to understand that these things are not just geopolitical out there, they're actually right here and they're having real impacts on our people here. When we know that ICE has been trained by the IDF, ICE is trained by Israel, uses the same technology as Israel. So we're talking about keeping ICE out of our communities. When we're talking about keeping cop cities out of our communities, we're talking about keeping that whole architecture of power and violence that's already here. It's already controlling the flow of resources here. So for myself, it becomes deeply personal. So I organize with the Deep Medicine Circle. We're working to grow food for our communities, deepening and growing mutual aid networks in terms of actual structures. How do we get food to people? How do we get medicine to people? If people need to walk off the job and stay home, how do we make sure they have food, shelter, medicine, and education? How do we organize that amongst ourselves, right? I think political education right now is critical to do intergenerationally, to learn from elders like Walter Riley's in the house. Walter, can you please put your hand up? Okay, this is one of our beloved elders here in the Bay Area. We have a rich wealth of elders here in the Bay that we need to be organizing with and learning from, because they have knowledge that isn't written down. And it's something that we can learn from. So that's, I think, oh yeah, the last thing I'll say is for healthcare workers. Healthcare workers across the spectrum are scared out of their minds. They're watching what's happening to me, and they're like, we're not gonna say anything, we're just gonna hope we can be quiet and keep our Black maternal health program going. And I'm like, if we don't speak up, we are all mowed down. We are all mowed down. And so we are starting a political education series called Cultivating Courage, a group of us who've been suspended. So a med student out in Emory, Umayma Mohammed, myself, Asfia Kadir, just a bunch of doctors and healthcare workers who've been suspended or been facing disciplinary proceedings, who are still speaking, because that's what we have to keep doing. And so how do we encourage and teach each other? What is this limit of your courage that you're feeling? How can you walk in alignment with your moral and professional obligations as a physician or a healthcare worker? So those are some things.
I like Jodi's frameworks. You have the kind of political education that is the mass work, or that should be the lifeblood of the mass work, and then you have the political education for, you know, our various organisms as they try to, as we try to become more effective. And I think we can all admit that we're playing catch up. I think, you know, I mean, along the lines of the mass work, I say never underestimate the introduction of dialectical materialism to people's diet. It really is, well, people, you know, I say almost 10 times out of 10 every time I facilitated it, someone has said, you know, that's exactly what I think, I just didn't know the terms. And there are some other staples, I think, to the mass work. But for our comrades, I would say we have to kind of come to terms with, excuse me, this is asthma, you will always say. We have to come to terms that this, what kind of I guess the heightening contradictions with a kind of take the covers off is the reality that it's a monopoly of violence that we are facing, more than, more than some kind of play for whatever privilege and comfort, that this thing doesn't operate without the, genocide and dehumanization of others. And so, getting, we can even think about the way we organize our movements almost optimistically into some kind of like proto or embryonic righteous political participation, as opposed to proto-embryonic organizations that can actually fight this system, that can actually beat this system. So now I would say like the kind of the guiding mood needs to be like disciplining ourselves. And again, it doesn't have to be super steely, but we do have to come to terms with our historical task. And finally, I think what we need to keep in mind for back to mass work is that it's also kind of, it's the venue, it's the venue in which the political education takes place. It actually does a lot of the work. So if we just are in some random office or room or something where people usually engage their intellectual life individually, it doesn't have the same effect as when you facilitate political education, let's say in some semblance of liberated territory or something. So we got the comrade right here. I don't know the protocol, do we say names or not? You know what I'm saying? But who was with me and others in this occupation of elementary and middle school they tried to shut down. We held the building for 4 months. Now that's not a plug. I mean, dig that. You know what I mean? But the moral of the story, as someone who has knocked on more doors than I can remember, and has begged people, to come to this or come to that, I've never seen more leverage as an organizer than when I did representing an occupation, representing something that we took. So minding that also, you can kind of let the environment do some of the work for you, do some of the convincing for you. And I think that opportunity is as this kind of failed state fails more and more and more from the position of taking over these sites, you can take all the groovy lesson plans and they might work better.
Brilliant. Oh. Brilliant work, comrades. However, we gotta decolonize the mic. We got 4 more questions to do, so whatever you were gonna say, cut it in half. I'm gonna start interrupting y'all with the Apollo stick. No, we're not gonna answer the questions that we have. Okay, so Steven, you're up.
Okay, so in a video that reemerged from 2001, current Vice President Jodi Dean is speaking at a National Conservatism Conference where he quotes President Richard Nixon saying, quote, "The professors are the enemy," and advocating for a frontal attack on universities and intellectual labor. As we know, anti-intellectualism, particularly targeting professors and other educators, has been a key component of fascist ideology, movements, and dictatorships across the world. While Walter Rodney reminds us that intellectuals are enemies of the people until proven otherwise, J.D. Vance claims ideologically distinct to what Rodney was referring to. In this current moment, or we could say conjuncture, what should be the role of scholars and intellectuals? How do we mobilize this sector of the petty bourgeois in the current struggle against neo-fascism?
Okay, so the order for this one, I'm gonna start, then we're gonna go Tongo, Jodi, and Rupa. So I'm going to model quick and thorough. First of all, right, wrong, or indifferent, we need to contend with the petty bourgeoisie one way or another because they are historically the most reactionary class. They are the most amenable to fascism because of Schadenfreude and many other reasons. So we cannot not address it. Secondly, we need to evaluate what the possibility and reality of class suicide is. Because people from Cabral to Walter Rodney talk about the petty bourgeoisie can go either way. They can align with the bourgeoisie or with the working class. And so we have to be serious and firm about what that choice is and evaluate what that actually looks like and means in this moment. We also need to evaluate the nature of our organizations. Many of them are majority to plurality petty bourgeois. And again, that is for a number of reasons, because of the relative access, leisure, and privilege that petty bourgeois folks have, because of a particular type of skill set, because of the merger of organizing and nonprofitism. And so we have to be serious and clear about what the nature of our organizations are and how are petty bourgeois folks incorporated and oriented, what is their role in our organizations, and what skills and resources do they bring, and therefore can they democratize, but also how are they instilling or influencing the culture of our organizations. And so that is to say, we need to address the petty bourgeois nature of our own organizations, be clear about what that looks like. And finally, what is our own orientation toward the working class and lumpen folks as persons who are knowledge workers or who do this type of petty bourgeois work. And so I do not think that we can leave the petty bourgeoisie to its own devices, but I also think we need to be clear about what that role is, how we're oriented to the petty bourgeoisie, and whether or not various petty bourgeois folks are willing to commit class suicide, and if not, then we have to understand that they're class enemies. Tongo.
You can give it up for that. we ain't that far behind this. Don't clap. Clap at the end. Can't lose a second. Yeah, I would just add to that. Oh, and I'm blanking on this beautiful statement this cat just wrote, in which he basically said, like, abandon the front lines that you currently have that are oriented around kind of improving the bourgeois environment of the institution. The only thing in that kind of strategy you should be worried about doing is putting together unions to fight with. There was some other great points, and I wish I remember. I would just also add, now for what I got to say. You know, one of the most instructive essays I've come across, and this is also great for political education, is the Cabral essay on what is it, national culture, revolutionary, what is it called? National culture and the revolution, some shit like that. If you Google national culture revolution Cabral, it'll come up. And basically he said that, you know, everyone has to organize from the position or synthesize from the culture of the mass denominator. And we can see that's one of our huge mistakes in the last 15, 20, actually trying to organize movement from a petty bourgeois socialization, going to really trying to interrupt and bother bourgeois environments, as opposed to taking the know-how and the kind of the integrity that is afforded people who have a life of the mind, and bringing it down into, you know, where the principal contradiction actually exists. So come on down to the trenches and you'll be okay.
Jodi.
No, don't do it.
We might get some comradely disagreement on the panel. We'll see. So I want to first start by thinking about academia and the university as a workplace site. And a few things to know is that in the United States, about half the people who get PhDs never go into academia. And then out of those who go into academia, about another half will never have a job with any job security. They will be perpetually contingent and part-time workers. Also on the, colleges and universities are sites with lots of other kinds of employees, from the administrators, from the top who get paid over $1 million to the bottom who barely make minimum wage, if that, and to all of the folks who do groundskeeping and cleaning. And so it's a large workplace that I think is important to keep in mind. And it's also a site of a lot of antagonisms and struggle, right? From unionization efforts from the service workers to unionization efforts from contingent faculty and untenured faculty, when we and graduate students. And when we keep that in mind, then I think we can also then make another jump to saying, okay, the kind of stereotype of the university being a hotbed of either leftist radicals or privileged people is a remnant of a myth that was maybe accurate for a couple of decades, if that, in the 20th century, but it doesn't really hold anymore. Now, the fancy universities are really sites for investment bankers and real estate moguls to make money on their investments and build up their reputation, while education is discarded and the place has become militarily or occupied by police, right? So I think that keeping the university as a site of struggle in mind is important, and also then the intellectual struggle and the struggle of ideas does matter, and it matters at the university setting, and it matters if you can talk about Palestine. And if you can say genocide is happening, because when you can't say that intellectually, then it means that the people in the mainstream media don't have anyone to interview other than a bunch of Zionists. So I think that the struggle matters. Next, I know I'm running over, but next thing is, I think it's also important when we talk about scholars and intellectuals to recognize organic intellectuals and independent scholars, and the way that our communities have all sorts of people who really develop ideas and express them, and that those kinds of intellectuals and scholars really matter. And then the last part, I'm not convinced right now that talking about the petty bourgeoisie is useful. I prefer to talk about service workers and the service sector, and to recognize that teachers, professors, nurses, massage therapists, nail workers, bus drivers, all of this is a massive service sector. And that they're hard to organize, like domestic workers, cleaners. It's a hard sector to organize, and there's lots of differences in it. But I think that when we can start to recognize that the vast majority of people doing service work have to sell their labor power to survive, that we can have an expansive notion of working class that might include people that before were part of the, theoretically part of the petty bourgeoisie, and then that can even include folks who work in bureaucracies. And I've been wondering if the kind of mass federal layoffs should be an opportunity to say, actually, people in bureaucracies can be really necessary and helpful, and they're not the enemy, right? The billionaires are the enemy. So that's where I'm on this one. What?
I said, in other words, read your book.
That's right, plug it.
So for me as a physician, just the perspective I'm coming from, understanding that physicians are the petit bourgeois managers of the capitalist healthcare system that we live in. Organizing doctors has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to address, in terms of the lack of willingness for people to commit class suicide, the lack of willingness for people to lose their positions of privilege, to lose their positions that they've worked so hard for, that a lot of people are in debt for because of the way the system is structured. And where this really came out for me was thinking about why were so many doctors quiet during a genocide that was literally murdering our colleagues. Dr. Abu Safia, who's being held by Israel as a hostage, was just electrocuted and tortured multiple times. He was the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, who was taken that famous picture of them just walking towards the tank. I was in touch with him regularly the month before his abduction. And doctors have been totally quiet. It was this moment where I was suspended, and then they attacked my clinical privileges and said I was an imminent danger to patients and staff, and students at UCSF because I was asking ethical questions about what do we do when someone comes from Israel to our university? Is there a process that we should have? Like, what if that person committed war crimes? Do we just bring them into medicine? What do we do? Right? These are important ethical questions that have to be contended with. And when they suspended my medical license, suspended my clinical privileges, the notice said if they're not reinstated in 14 days, we will have to report you to the medical board. And I was like, oh my God, they're gonna ding my license. Like, what do I have as a physician who serves so many people in our community without my license? And I just sat with that for 3 days. I sat with that. I was just sitting in prayer and meditation for 3 days. And my lawyer was advising me to resign. And he's like, you should just resign so you don't damage your license. I was like, I'm not gonna resign. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. And I sat there and I just waited. It was basically a game of chicken. And in that game of chicken, I got to the point of not being afraid. I'm like, okay, they damaged my license. Then what happens? Okay, then what do I do? How do I organize? What do I do? And the doctor, Abu Sitta, who is the doctor who gave the testimony at The Hague, who was in Gaza those first 43 days as the hospitals were bombed, he's texting me from Lebanon as the pagers are blowing up. And he's like, Rupa, are people out there supporting you at UCSF? Are people supporting you? Where's your support? I'm like, people are afraid. And I said, but once I sat and I realized I wasn't afraid to lose my job, the whole game changed. And he said, welcome. He's like, if people in medicine do not lose the chokehold that the career has on them, meaning the petit bourgeois of the doctors, they actually can't be in alignment with their moral and professional obligations to serve the people. And that's a really important thing for us to recognize what the doctors in Gaza are showing us. They're not getting paid. They haven't been paid this whole year. They show up every day. They show up every day, 24 hours a day with bombs going off. Their family members are being killed to make sure those people get the health care they need. And so when we see something like that, they're showing us the path to what a liberation medicine looks like. And that's not necessarily what we could call an intellectual scholarly practice, but that is something we have to put language to as doctors who are being silenced, repressed, and murdered. And so for me, this is a very important time to politicize healthcare workers, to politicize students. And what I've been seeing is just a mass, just confusion around liberalism, commitment to liberalism, a misunderstanding of what their roles are and what their duties are, the contradictions of the professional, ethical, moral obligations of being a healthcare worker, a physician, and what the reality, that they're presented with in the matrix of power of these institutions that are deeply Zionist, which is why no medical institution has spoken up about a genocide that's targeted healthcare workers. No medical institution in the West. And so for me, this is actually a very important question, and I think there's a role that scholars have to play in giving language, because when we don't have language, we can't imagine. And that imagining is what people need to see right now, the radical horizon of our imaginations of what a liberation medicine can be requires some heavy work. And it's not just intellectual, it's artistic, it's creative, it's poetic, it's all of those things.
Thank you. All right, Jodi, you are up, and then the order for this question will start with Steven, then Rupa, then Tongo, then myself.
Here's my question. Which of the terrible, bad, awful things that are happening now, including but not limited to the Trump-Musk things, which create new opportunities for struggle? So let me give the background of the question. So it's motivated by a hope that thinking dialectically pushes us forward. So I'll give an example also from my upcoming book on neo-feudalism. What I do is think about how the uncoupling of production and accumulation and the rise of services such that the majority of people in the world are actually in some kind of service work, that this gives us a way to think about a vanguard class movement on a warming planet. That in fact, all sorts of different services provide the kind of ways that we need to think about work and provisioning on a planet where the future is not going to be encaptured by the expansion of industry. So that's the wager. So it's trying to think dialectically about where we are. And so I'm asking all of our panelists to think about the kind of the awful situation of the moment, but is there a way that even some of the worst things actually push us forward in a hopeful manner?
Steven?
Cool, I'll start, yeah. You know, one thing I think is really important, despite, you know, because again, I think about my students and they come in, until they come into the classroom and just, they have this look of like, oh my God, what's happening, right? Like this guy's doing all these things, you know, that one student brought up the idea of shock and awe, right? They're just in shock and awe because of all this stuff that Trump is doing. But I was trying to remind them, and people I talk to, just my neighbors and stuff, that, you know, this idea of the ruling class, their hegemony is never complete. It's a constant struggle against them, right? It's not something that they have complete dominance over us. And I think it's an important reminder to have that, right? Because I think sometimes we might have this pessimism where it's like, there's no hope, right? And really what we need to have is that revolutionary optimism that people can still continue to struggle, you know? And oftentimes I think, you know, going back to what Charisse was saying, the pedagogification of our organizing, or because of the nonprofit world and all that stuff, sometimes creates that sense of like pessimism, right? That this is just the way it is and there's no way out. Rather than thinking of us of a revolutionary optimism that there's different people struggling at the same time. Like as of right now, we're meeting here, I bet you around the country there's people organizing meetings, talking about what they're planning to do in their community. As we're talking right now, right? As we're talking right now, for example, in LA, they're trying to build a migrant defense networks. And they're meeting right now as we speak right now, right? Those type of things, I think, the contradictions that we're seeing, the nastiness of the Trump administration and his, you know, right-wing goons is going to create a moment of resistance, a moment of dialectically thinking, right? That we need to think about these isolated struggles around the country and internationally as mass struggles. How do we connect all these different struggles that are happening? Talking about all these different service sector workers, right? My mom was a domestic worker, and I know the isolation of a domestic worker, right? It's very difficult to organize domestic workers. Right? And so like, but like at the same time, there's ways, because I know this organization in LA on the EDESCA, and they've been organizing domestic workers, right? So there is ways of doing this, but again, the importance of connecting them to mass struggles. And like I said, these attacks on migrants have led to community defense network building, right? Attack on trans community has led to different types of systems of care work and mutual support, right? Attacks on education, right? The fact that, you know, they're starting to attack my university, for example, which has not been hit so hard by the budget cuts, but Sonoma State, for example, the Cal State system has been hit really hard, right? And if you think back of the budget cuts, a few months ago, the president of Sonoma capitulated to the grassroots efforts of the students on the divestment from Israel. So it makes you think about it. Why is it that this university is the first one to get hit so hard, right? But this leads us to the points of when our universities are getting hit, when these educational spaces are getting hit, whether not just be the university, but even public school, this is when our political education at the grassroots level needs to start, right? Because again, it's ongoing, it's been going, but maybe this is the moment that we also start to think about that. Like, how do we get involved in, if our education is being attacked at the universities and the public school level, how do we start doing public political education at the grassroots level, right? That I think is very vital for me. And more importantly, also when we think of these right-wing groups that are starting to develop and have been developing, how do we see the rise of left-wing and progressive forces building armed defense forces? And we've seen that. There's been videos developing all over the place, where there is people that are starting to think about armed self-defense. Again, this is not thinking about the idea of armed struggle, but they think of just defense. It's something that's starting to develop more and more because of this right-wing attack that we're having all over the country. So I think in this moment that we're seeing all this nastiness, there is people that have been mobilizing. Again, I'll go back to the Obama administration. There's been people organizing since then and even before that, right? And as Rupa was mentioning, there's people in the crowd that I wish I would be there to meet, that have a history of organizing, that we could learn so much from, right? So I think this idea of opening is very vital for us right now.
Rupa?
Okay, thank you for that. Whew. Okay, where to start? So we're in this time of, I call it like a narrative wiggliness. You were talking about the struggle around the hegemony and the narratives of the hegemony, and we're in this very exciting moment. And I was talking to my friend Boots Riley about this actually, and that the most important people right now are the artists, I feel. Because the artists are going to articulate for us a horizon that we don't see, that we can't even yet imagine. And so it is important to do these articulations and these experiments, as you were mentioning, of providing mutual support. One of the things that I've been thinking about, like the opportunities, so as the fire is raging in LA, people in the water hydrants run dry and people are like, where the fuck's the water? And then all of a sudden people are talking about the Resnicks. And the Resnicks own 177,000 acres of prime stolen indigenous land, right, through the California Central Valley. And they grow their empire. The largest grossing, most profitable agricultural company in the world is the Wonderful Company, okay? And these people, like, have taken the lion's share of the Kern Water Bank, the public resource. So our commons, the land, the water, the healthcare, the housing, these things are being choke-held by billionaires. So if we're in this moment where people are like, wait, where the hell is our water? Okay, the Resnicks got the water, okay? So then people start asking, well, who are the Resnicks and what are they doing? Oh, they're sending money to Israel. Okay, so the money that's being made off the agriculture here, off of the body and the memories of genocided California native tribes through the Valley of California, now going to grow pistachios, have a pistachio war out in Iran, and the money and the profit from that is going to universities in Israel to create Elbit system drones that are going and sniping and murdering Palestinian children in the head. So these things are all intimately connected. And so these, as we draw these connections, one of the exciting opportunities that we've had here in the Bay, both on a rooftop farm in Oakland and 38 acres on the coast, is working on this, what we call the Farming is Medicine program. I invite you all to come on the 26th to the David Brower Center. We're going to be screening a documentary Walter and I made with other people in our organization, the Deep Medicine Circle, at 6 p.m. And we're going to share this documentary of our Farming is Medicine program. There's 4 parts. First part is land back to California Native people. So where we're working, where we can move land back, we move land back. And we work together to steward the land and to grow the food for people, okay? The second part is we frame farmers as stewards of health, and we pay them like healthcare workers. We give them professional development stipends. We give them gear stipends. We uplift their care work, not just of growing the food, but of stewarding the soil and regenerating that soil. Our soil in 3 years has sunk 100% the amount of carbon, so double the carbon at the lowest depths because we're growing using agroecological principles. Number 3 is we decommodify all of our food. We give it away for free. So we grow around 50,000 pounds of organic food from these 2 farms that we give to people and organizations in the Bay Area who get it to the people who need it the most. And number 4 is when we can do that, food can become medicine, and we can re-enter these mutual aid networks of care that used to exist in these lands where no one went hungry before colonial conquest. And so when we look at these kinds of programs, these are opportunities. And what's exciting to me is that I just gave a lecture to a bunch of farmers. They were like a room of mostly white farmers, some of them wearing MAGA hats, wore this keffiyeh, shared this program, standing ovation. So this is a really important time to think through how are people struggling with their material conditions where they can see opportunities that bridge divides that have been enforced upon us by a racist system, and how can we start forging novel partnerships to get land back in the hands of people from whom it was stolen, and to start moving our resources to support those people who could be doing this care work of the earth in a dignified way together. So that's one example.
Actually, I really wouldn't say much more than what Steven said. Really just ditto to that. Or just real quick, like, I think, what the young folks say, it hit different. It hit different when it's when it's people of color, or when it's a vanguard of color in Detroit, where I'm based now. They're not even, people aren't even getting court dates who ICE snatch. So you're supposed to get a court date. You can make a case like, no, I'm really supposed to be here, or here's my asylum request or whatever. But the report reports are coming back that they're not even getting a week. Like, they take you on Tuesday, you probably not even gonna make it to next Monday before they put you on a plane. So the tone of the organizing around it, we've gone straight to community defense. We've gone straight to ICE patrols. We're not talking about, going downtown and yelling at politicians and corporations and this type of thing. It's more of a direct intervention in our oppression. And so I think that front line is one of the biggest, I hate to use the word opportunities of this neo-Confederate tendency. But.
Yeah, I also echo what Steven said, especially about self-defense. I've been pushing this line for a long time, armed and otherwise, because the thing about self-defense is that it's not just about arms. It's about how do you procure the things you need to defend yourself. What are the ethics that we need? How do we need to relate to one another when we're in a defensive posture? What are the forms of care that we need to implement in order to defend each other? What are the institutions that we need to build that are foundational to defense? And so this idea of defense being reducible just to arms, although those are important, and I love my leftist comrades, but y'all tripping. Yes, we can give up weapons when they do. Right now, I think what the right fundamentally understands that we do not is that everything is up for grabs. Everything is a front of struggle, and I think that we don't take that seriously enough as radicals, revolutionaries, however you self-identify. I think the other thing too, and so the question was about new opportunities. I don't think these are new opportunities. I think these are belated, because if we believed our own analysis, again, as I always talk about, then we would have been doing this. If we really believed that fascism was coming, why are we on our heels? If we really believed that, white militias have been arming themselves for decades now, have infiltrated the police and the military, then why haven't we organized accordingly? And so I think that we have, sometimes when we have this analysis, we want to be right. We don't want to be effective, right? We don't want to win. And so that is something that I think we need to fix post-haste. And finally, but something that I do think we can also do is highlight the failures of the Democratic Party, not as a dunk, but to show that our side is inevitable. So an example is that Hakeem Jeffries was talking about, the Democrats are going to battle the right wing in the courts, and then not even a week later, he's like, well, what are we supposed to do? They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the executive branch. And so it just shows these lily-livered, mealy-mouthed losers. They're not, and it's important to point that out, because many people do believe that the Democratic Party is an alternative, and it's our responsibility to not only point that they are not an alternative, but to also to really fill that gap. It's one thing for the left to point that out, it's quite another to show that we are a viable alternative. And so now is the time to be presenting ourselves and doing the work to be a viable alternative and not just contrarian. Okay. Rupa, you're up. And then the order will go Tongo, Jodi, myself, and Steven. Rupa.
All right, it's a very, very simple question. How do we rapidly hasten the dissolution of liberalism to lift the brakes on revolutionary momentum and movement? Jodi.
No, it's Tongo. Okay.
In verse, please.
I didn't get the questions. You notice they're working off the. No. There's nothing. Can you say that one more time?
How do we rapidly hasten the dissolution of liberalism to lift the brakes on revolutionary momentum?
Do it. The brakes off. There's a lot there's a lot to kind of deconstruct. I'm just reading this great chapter in what's the book called? Mutual Aid. what's the guy? Dean? No, you know, I'm sleepy. We have a 14-month-old, and then I'm winding down. But I digress. There's these beautiful exercises in that one chapter, no fakes, no, somebody help me out, man. You haven't read this fucking book? What's wrong with you? It's a great book.
PM, Noah, what's good?
I mean, okay, now mind you, there is like an anarchist kind of slide to this thing, but there are some fucking.
It's me out here, don't hide now.
But there's some really.
Mickey's got the mic.
There's some really, there are some good practices if you take some of the malarkey out. But there's a lot of ways we can deconstruct what we brought into movement. And it's almost like a perpetual political education project that needs to be, you know, baked into the praxis. Like, let's really think about, because it's not like people are you know, just magically liberal. It's because they've been raised to be, they were being raised to be good little fascist citizens, and then some switch, or they saw, well, this is going nowhere, or they seen something that was just outrageous, and now here we are. I mean, especially like if you look at, I don't know, man, like, you can say kind of, you can say a few things, but like around the crash of, what was that, 08? 08 and 11. You know, I think that's where a lot of like disillusionment started creeping in, and a lot of folks were like, okay, fuck this. And so, but still, you know, the ascension of the corporatocracy, and especially how like the cultural supremacy of it. Like back in my day, and I'll stop rambling in a second. Back in my day, if you worked for a corporation, like it wouldn't even take, nobody had to have any politics to look at you crazy.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you don't like people, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was like an evil army to be a part of, but now I work at tech and all these other synonyms for fucking corporate armies, right? And so, you know, they fucking won. Like, this kind of new foam of the bourgeoisie, they really won the cultural, this major cultural war, cultural project. And so, like, we are coming into movement super individualistic with a whole bunch of terrible habits. And so, I think as opposed to just browbeating people like, man, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, let's spend some time, let's slow down a little bit and just kind of deconstruct what we brought in and put in place structures of decision making, structures of evaluation, structures of criticism, self-criticism, you know, that almost think about it like healing the counter-revolutionary consciousness that we brought in.
I actually think that the world and circumstances is destroying liberalism right before our eyes, and that it's going, that after, I think Tongo is right to mention 2008, that was a major pivot point, but it's been sort of limping along, and the blatant disintegration of even the semblance of international law with the tolerance, enthusiasm, and support for Israel's genocide has also been a massive blow to any conceit that liberalism, you know, that it was somehow a legitimate and effective ideology of rule. And then for, you know, the misguided Democrats who still thought there was some kind of hope, they see Trump, you know, just unraveling it in their own party's inability to do anything whatsoever. So I think that actually it's already unraveling. The question has got to be, how do we build up a Marxist, socialist, communist left to be the leaders that we need to be in the movement, in the movement. You used the expression our historical task, right? That seems to me to be our responsibility right now.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said, and I even wrote down, perhaps that's the wrong question is, how do we hasten the dissolution of liberalism, and how do we build up revolutionary consciousness? But here's what we need to remember. There are two fundamental challenges to liberalism, and that is socialism or barbarism.
Yeah,
That is to say, it is fascism or communism. Both of those are populist movements. And so right now, the dissolution of liberalism, the effective dissolution of liberalism is fascism right now, neo-fascism. And so that's something that we have to take account of. And so it can't just be against liberalism, because then we might get something, well, I don't know if it's part, just a different intensity, right? But that being said, two things. One is that I just think we need to kill the liberal within. Like, start there. And that is hard to do. So I'm in academia, right? And I have moments when I do believe that we live in a one-party state with two factions. But there have been moments since the tangerine tyrant took power that I've been like, oh shit, did we fuck up? Like, should we have voted for that lady? But then I have to remember, again, I have to believe my own analysis. I have to kill the liberal within me that, oh, I am for the decline of empire. Oh, I am against DEI. Oh, both parties have militarized the society. Oh, I'm against genocide. And so even though my own comforts, even though the status quo, which I have been acculturated into, is in rapid decline, that's actually a good thing, right? And so we have to daily, minute by minute, kill the liberal within, and that's the first step, I think, to combating liberalism, as Mal put it. And finally, we need to think about what are the aspects of liberalism that we want to salvage in the short term, or at least wrest them back to what they actually are, which is sort of more radical or progressive possibilities, one of which is lawfare. Do we actually want to engage in these court battles to stop the bleeding temporarily, or is this something that we want to give up? And so I think we need to be sober and clear in our analysis about what are the things, at least as tactics, we want to engage in now that might be part of the sort of liberal apparatus until we build up a stronger and more effective left. So these are decisions that we have to make, I think. Steven? Oh no, we can't, hold on, we can't hear you. Okay, go.
Sorry?
All right, go.
Oh, now I was gonna say, just going back, building on Charisse, bourgeois society is a hell of a drug. You know,
Yeah.
and to fight that, you know, it takes a lot of work, because again, for many, Trump is kind of the outside of bourgeois society, and we just need to go back to bourgeois society. He's the outlier, and he's creating all these kinds of problems, and we just need to be back to this liberalism, this bourgeois society, and things will be fine. And we need to fight that, right? We need to combat that. And I think one level that's really important to think about, that I think a lot of the masses around me, and I think of people I think about, is that for when they think of activism, they're looking towards celebrities and the celebrity culture as the spokespersons of activism. And we really, you know, have to combat that, right? And really get us seen at the grassroots level, as Jodi was talking about, right? There's so many organic intellectuals that are doing so much important work here in Los Angeles. So many folks on the ground doing the work that are the ones leading campaigns for mass struggles, right? However, liberalism has got us thinking that we need to be listening to these celebrities, right? And then debating whether these celebrities are radical or not, right? So getting caught up with the Super Bowl, for example, and then talking about whether revolutionary or not, right? And then he gets stuck there, right? And think about how do I get better housing, and you know, stop the budget cuts of our schools, right? And so I think, you know, another important part, and I mentioned this earlier, but you know, going back to that Maoist idea of politics and command, right? This idea that our struggles, whatever we do, we always have to remember that we have to put this anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, but more importantly for me, socialist perspective in the front in command, right? How do we think about socialist politics, and how do we encourage our everyday folks around us to start thinking about socialist politics, right? I think, you know, I take a study abroad program to Cuba every winter session. I take students to Cuba in January, and these students, one thing that's really interesting to me when I hear them is that everyone tells them not to go. right? Why are you going to Cuba? You shouldn't go to Cuba, it's dangerous, all kinds of propaganda about Cuba. And when they get there, their liberalism gets challenged. Again, Cuba has all kinds of contradictions that we could get into, but one thing that gets challenged is that liberalism. The idea of the two-party system, as Charisse was talking about, is that that's the democratic process, right? That gets challenged. And one thing that we start to realize is that the sanctions on Cuba are also sanctions against us. Sanctions from knowing an alternative, right? Liberalism has prevented an alternative for us to think about, right? So you think about the Democratic Party, how they bastardize our legitimate grievances and struggles. They turn them into DEI, right? They turn them into all kinds of identity reductionism, legitimate issues, right? Of housing, issues of education, issues of welfare, right? Those things that are legitimate. Once the Democratic Party has captured them, they lose the potential socialist politics in them. And so I think for us, in this moment of this idea of combating this bourgeois society, is to really forefront our politics. You know, and again, I know for a lot of us that's scary, right? For a lot of us, you know, in this moment, it's a moment of fear. But again, I think the more you organize collectively, the more that fear goes away, right? And I think, you know, as someone that's an academic myself, and I'm in the university, I've never really applied for grants and fellowships. I just had to do my work and figure it out. But this is a moment where all these folks that are being fearful because they're losing the grants and fellowships, this is a moment for them to wake up and be like, okay, how do you do your work without all that extra money that you were getting, and start actually serving people and not getting caught up? Because again, those grants and fellowships are also a way of seduction. They seduce you into bourgeois society. Right? And so how do we challenge those narratives? How do we challenge that at this current moment that there's this fear arising of potentially losing your funding, right? And how do we mobilize and politicize that?
All right, last question. So that we do have time for Q&A. Why don't we answer this question with just a couple sentences?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Tongo, go. Bring us home. That's right.
Yes. This question really is kind of inspired by the Stephen Biko essay, in which he basically says kind of like the art of political leadership is knowing what you can and can't compromise on. And so, what practice should we not compromise on, especially when engaging in coalitions today?
So we're gonna go Rupa, myself, Jodi, or Steven, and then Jodi, you will have the last word.
I think, God, what should we not compromise on? I think a revolutionary politics. I think making concessions. We should not be making concessions at this point, but we should be pushing for socialist agendas very clearly. That was 2 sentences.
That was great. What should we not compromise on? We cannot compromise on the fact that on any means necessary, that we need every single tool in our toolkit. And even if, for example, violence is not your bag, you don't have to be, you can watch the door. If protesting is not your bag, you can hand out flyers, but we need every single tool in our toolkit, and we cannot be counter-revolutionary against our own comrades by shaming or blaming because people are choosing particular tactics or strategies. Steven?
Again, like I said, politics and command, right? We have to lead with our politics, not just our pockets or our jobs or our healthcare, but how does our politics shape all those different struggles that we have? One, and as Charisse taught us, anti-communism as a mode of governance is not just about communism. It's about all of us thinking of an alternative, right? I'm down with communism, but not everyone is. But recognizing that an attack on communists is an attack on all of us. So how do we build that solidarity, recognizing that the left has to build that again and get rid of anti-communism?
Yes. Jodi, final word.
We can't compromise on the need for unity and clarity in our organizations. I think that comes about also with an ability to have self-criticism within our organizations and a sense of trust and confidence in our comrades. So to work effectively in coalition, you have to know within your group what your commitments are, and you've got to be able to trust your comrades that you're all in it together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm like, my brain is swirling around and I'm riled up, so thank you so much for everything. We want to take some questions from the audience. You'll have to come up here because this will not reach all of you. So questions, comments, come up here, please.
I guess start forming a line, I guess.
Yeah, maybe a line would be good, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you know. All right.
In the discussions about fighting to build movement and build unity, criticism, to what extent is fighting cultism significant in your own struggles and for our movement here in Oakland and Crunch around the country?
We're going to take them all.
Yeah, take them all at once, yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, shit.
That's actually perfect because like
I'll run it back. I'll run it back.
Hold on, Mike. Great for notes. Y'all ready?
Yep.
So that's actually perfect because I was just one of the biggest problems I think I have been facing as a baby organizer in the Bay is looking towards other problematic baby organizers in the Bay, like activists, influencers, people who build a cult of personality, and you're either with us or you're against us. That read Sophia Bukhari, The War Before, and read the chapter on coalition building and still use identity politics and things like that to divide our movements. How do we encourage criticism of problematic spaces while remaining comrades? How do we deal with contradictions within the movement where we fracture movements along dogmatic, anti-Black, misogynist, homophobic, and transphobic lines? And how, this is a really important one as a femme person of color who has been sexually assaulted in the activist space. How do we get healing within that community of many of us who have faced something like that?
Sorry for all the questions. We have so many questions. So I think in the past 16 months, we've seen some significant defeats for the domestic left. One of them being a failure to live up to anti-imperialist principles. With the fall of Syria, for example, there has been various waffling. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I forgot the second thing. One thing I'm wondering is what lessons have you gotten over the past 16 months and what do you take from them?
I think the idea of historical memory really resonated with me, and I wanted to ask, like, what are the institutions that actually target historical memory and then like make it hard for people to remember? And the other thing along similar lines is like, consciousness is not always enough. So how do you go from revolutionary consciousness to revolutionary confidence?
Before we take this last question, come on. It sounds like Steven didn't hear the first one, so when you guys answer the first question, if you could repeat it, that would be great.
I'm gonna repeat all of this.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Okay, I got an easy one for y'all. I'm new to my journey in communism and being an organizer, but I'm curious from each of you, what is one book or resource you would recommend for study that is not your own writing? Yeah, I got you.
Okay. All right, so the first question was about how do we fight cultism in the movement. Second question is, how do we critique problematic spaces while remaining comrades? How do we engage in healing when there are various forms of violence that are committed within our organization and within movement? I'm paraphrasing, but hopefully that was the crux. Third is, what lessons have we learned over the last 16 months? What lessons and takeaways? Fourth question was, what institutions target historical memory, and how do we go from revolutionary consciousness to revolutionary confidence? And then the fifth question is, what is one book or resource that you will recommend for study that is not your own? Now, I will say, everybody doesn't have to respond to everything. So just pick a few things that you want to respond to. So we can probably have another round. All right, so who wants to start? Does anybody have a response to number one? How do we fight cultism? I'm not gonna weigh in because I love cults. I watch about them all the time. If I was not a professor, I'd be a cult leader, so.
Look, it really turned me out too. Now I watch them on my own time.
He's gonna play the guitar, do poetry.
Two quick improvisations. I would say, like one of the ingredients of kind of like the cultish left is bringing all of the kind of the analysis and praxis and leadership in investing it in this one person. And so I think, you know, we can kind of combat that with kind of honest and rigorous study of all, like, you know, like take the classics on their own terms, synthesizing with our own experience, our own imagination, as opposed to just one figure, or even the kind of, you know, hey, the figurealization. It doesn't work. of the organization. Right, so like, it's just, anytime you have like a super vanguard that's led by a super vanguard person, there's a problem. And then also, I think what kind of cults thrive on is like control, or cultish left tendencies, thrive on controlled environments, you know, and so like just going to that kind of specific strata, and even like a strata within a strata, and just organizing there, as opposed to testing out your praxis all over the place. I think that kind of keeps you honest when you don't have the kind of the script that works, you know, or if you all you have is a script, it only works in a couple of places, and you can stay in this kind of incestuous political space, as opposed to what actually happens to your praxis when you apply it outside of your comfort zone.
Other thoughts on the cult question?
I was just gonna do any of them, not, I thought we were doing anything.
I mean, let's just take them in order and see
Okay,
if people
mind.
wanna have comments on these. So, Steven, cult question? No?
For the cult question, okay. Well, you know, I think what's important for me for folks to realize, you know, and I always try to get, you know, people around me to understand this. You know, if we go back to Gramsci's idea of the organic intellectual, we all have the ability to theorize and interpret the world. We all have the ability to analyze the world, right, and to interpret it and criticize it and critique it. When we come from that space to understand that, we start to challenge the idea that one person knows everything and all of us have to listen to them, rather than all of us have the ability to interpret and challenge the world, right? So like sometimes we might look at that one person and be like, wow, that person's so smart, or they know everything. Well, maybe because they've had more time to sit down and study. They've had more time to sit down and have the privilege to study and interpret the world. While a lot of our workers and family members are at work, they have not had the time to sit down and study food, right? So I think the idea of combating cultish behavior is that, right? Is really recognizing that all of us have the ability to interpret the world, and have to have the possibility to do it, right? We have to give our peeps the possibility to do that.
So the second one is about how do we engage in criticism of the problematic tendencies but remain comrades, and then how do we promote healing within these spaces? Go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, I think, you know, in our Marxist tradition, there's a rich history of criticism, self-criticism that we need to study more. I don't think we study it enough. You know, I think we know it, and some of us know it, but I really think we need to sit down and think about how different historical party formations have relied on criticism, self-criticism to really build the organization. And I think that obviously you could only do that when you have a higher unity with somebody, when you have higher unity with members in that organization. Right? If someone is not ready to commit to being in an organization and be organized, it's going to be very difficult to do that. But once you're committed to an organization and you are held accountable to that organization, I think that's when the self-criticism is important. But I would recommend us to study that more, right? To study the historical legacies of criticism, self-criticism.
I think that the question strikes me as something that becomes really strong in movement spaces that are really eclectic, where people don't have specific ties and expectations of one another, where it's not, like, almost like it's too informal. And so there's all sorts of psychological and emotional investments and no guideposts. And so, and that's hard, right? Movement spaces can be really hard because you've got people with a lot of different, you know, groups and backgrounds. And if, you know, if you're in a space where other groups, you know, won't work with your group, then it might just be you'll have to find other people to work with, right? Like, it just can have to be like, let them do their thing. Don't expect to be able to solve every single problem. Just get them, you know, just move away from them and get the work done that you need to do. And then other folks will maybe be attracted to your group and want to do the work with you.
This is such an interesting set of questions because there are very few physicians who have been in movement spaces, so I've only worked 50 to 60% as a doctor of my time, and the rest of the time I was organizing and doing work in music. And so the years of working with community groups with whom I have tight relationships, and it goes down to those relationships, have carried me through times of character and right now like academic assassination, just attempts to remove me or silence me or degrade me, has come through, the resilience has come through just decades of investment in relationship building and trust building and showing up. Right now, we have this historic mobilization of healthcare workers for Palestine, who, you know, first described themselves as a leaderless movement with shadowy leadership. And so there was a lot of like wacky dynamics happening that still continue with the lack of accountability, lack of criticism, lack of self-criticism, lack of showing up for the hard work of creating organizational structure that people can tap into and feel safe enough and secure that they can contribute. And so when I think about that difference from what we mobilized in, you know, when Mario Woods was shot, when Luis Congoro Pat was shot with the Do No Harm Coalition, that organization and that group of physicians and healthcare workers developed a strong degree of trust, so that when challenges came up, there was a great resilience of the whole group to withstand that challenge. So I think that this is part of the growing pains that people who have not been involved in movement work are now realizing, oh my God, I gotta get involved and counter ICE in my neighborhood, I gotta get involved. And so this is an important time to do that political education. And it's like person by person building relationships. And I agree, like if there's an obstacle, you just, right now especially, gotta move around because there's a genocide. And you go around and you just get the work done with the people who you trust.
I feel like we could really spend the rest of the time and another 10 hours on that, you know what I mean? That's a really important question. And almost like we fucking figure this out, now we can win, you know what I mean? I think, man, there's so much to kind of like, almost like, out of respect, don't want to kind of brainstorm, but one thing we can try is like slowing down. think it's part of it's both, it's tricky or insidious because we have all of this fucking genocidal material to contend with. And time is of the essence. But at the same time, what hitches a ride with that is the hegemony we've internalized, in which it's all about being as productive as we can and de-animating ourselves, dehumanizing ourselves for whatever the effort is. So kind of within movement, within our organizations, like de-emphasizing output and emphasizing our development, I think is one way that we can is what we can make structural that can heal that.
Can I, just in response to that, Tongo, for us right now, for me, that challenge is really around lives. Like the genocide for a doctor, right, is like a code blue. It's like we're in the emergency room. It is for all of us as humans of consciousness. But when I'm seeing my colleagues and patients murdered in their beds, it strikes a particular chord. So that tension between slow down and speed up has been the hardest part, the biggest challenge. Same with people being hungry in the Bay. Slow down to build the organizational structure so we can do our farming effectively, but speed up because people are hungry. People are skipping meals. 25% of people are skipping meals in their home so the kids can eat. So that's like, how do we actually balance that slowness that needs to happen with the actual material intensity of violence that people are facing? So when I think about historical memory here, as we're sitting here in this place, and the rain is coming down on the pavement, so it can't even hit the earth. And we think about, as I was driving around last year, my brother Benali, who passed last December, driving around his home territory in Diné territory, now in Arizona, I was looking at the strip malls and I was remembering Clee's songs and remembering his writings on indigenous anarchism. And I was just thinking, like, what's happening right now in Gaza, what's happening right now is what happened right here. So, like, when we're talking about socialism and capitalism, we're talking about all these ideas, and we're not touching the earth, and we're not feeling the soil, and we're not remembering the genocide that happened here, that California Native people don't have access to running water an hour north from here, Hopland Band of Pomo, right? So we're living in a land as settlers, as most of us from forced migrations, but we're still here on someone else's land, and we've been brought here, and we're here enacting parts of an erasure of historical memory just by our presence as settlers on stolen land. And so the reconnecting to that land, the reconnecting with the people, the original people of struggle in this area feels extremely critical to me, and is not something that we usually hear about in a lot of like left, well, not really, in the ways that my brother Clee would talk about, in the ways that they would organize in those communities. And so, yeah, that's just something that I've just been thinking about as I'm watching what's happening out there, and these pictures of this redevelopment of Gaza, right, like fucking Las Vegas, all the dead bodies underneath, like what's underneath our feet here, what's in the soil, what memories need to be spoken and healed together. Question about how we heal from sexual violence in our communities, and that's something we actually have to deal with, the intersectional dynamics of oppression even amongst ourselves as we organize. It's a critical thing that comes up multiple times in our organizing, and I don't have an answer for that, but it feels like it's probably that same process of criticism and self-criticism with a lot of like bandwidth and love and processes that can hold us together instead of make us fall apart.
Or maybe we bring back the drop squads. Grab these motherfuckers.
I'm for the tar and feathering, because tar and feathering is both painful and long-lasting, because it is hard to get fucking tar and feather out. Yeah, okay, next question is about the lessons over the last 16 months, and takeaways. Lessons and takeaways from the past 16 months.
This goes in a different direction from the slow down thing. My takeaway was like, oh my God, my time can expand infinitely and I really can do 5 actions a week, right? It was like, before October, it was like, I have no time, leave me alone, I can't do anything. And then all of a sudden, actually I can. And actually everybody around me can. And so it was this strange expansion and elastic nature of time in a genocide, an emergency that was, to me, a really powerful thing to learn.
I learned that every medical institution is deeply invested in racism, and we're all really fucked until we fix it, like, together, and I'm here for that.
You know, I think that's something that I've learned over the past 16 months is that it is hard for people to engage in solidarity without placing themselves at the center. And that's something we really, really, really need to work on a lot. And I think that that's part of that liberalism that we talked about earlier. But, so what can happen, right, is that it takes, when we have to defend each other, so like when somebody gets attacked, for example, that takes a lot of organizing and a lot of revolutionary energy. And so there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of discipline that needs to be practiced and cultivated within our movements where we can't really move as individuals right now. There's just too many fronts on which we're fighting. And so I think that the more that we work in solidarity in ways that we don't see immediate reciprocity, are really important, because I think that that is how we're able to articulate a politics that doesn't lead back directly to immediate effects on us as individuals. Steven, you got anything? Okay,
Yeah, I think these past 16 months, you know, internationalism, right? I think we really got to incorporate that in our solidarity work and our anti-imperialist work. You know, again, when I go take students to Cuba, that's something that I really try to get into them to think about, right? The importance of internationalism, the importance of thinking about what this country is doing to other places abroad, right? The sanctions in Venezuela, sanctions in Cuba. I try to get the students to see that, you know, when you hear that your government is sanctioning another country, you've been to a sanctioned country, you know what that looks like. So you got to share with others what that is, right? And really combat the propaganda that's been told to us about these places, right? So I think internationalism is very important, and more importantly, also that our institutions are hostile to internationalism. You know, I've been attacked in my university for speaking up for Palestine, so I'm organizing with my students, right? And I can really see how it's created a chilling effect on other faculty and staff about what our work that we're doing on campus. And so I think, you know, continuing to do that work despite the potential threats that we have. And again, really doing it collectively, because the more we do it collectively, the less we do alone, right? Because there's more of us doing it together. And I think that's very important, right? So again, the idea of internationalism is key in the work that we do.
I learned that it's better to have a diaper size that's a little too big and fits just right. Learned that if you're gonna eat corn chips in the middle of the night, pour it into a bowl. Don't do it.
Oh my gosh, the bag. Let me tell you something about that crinkling bag. It's quite loud. We're tired. All right, so the next question is, what institutions target historical memory? And then the second part of that question was, how do we go from revolutionary consciousness to revolutionary confidence? Yeah.
I'll speak to the position I'm in, the university. I think the university in general is hostile to historical memory. One thing is to study history, another thing is to have historical memory. I think you can study history and study facts and dates and all that stuff and think of history that way. And not see, but historical memory is politicizing history and seeing any connection to you and the struggles of the past and their relationship to you and to the present, right? And I think that is very important and crucial. But these institutions, most institutions are hostile to historical memory. And I forget where I learned that the importance of historical memory in Salvador. There's an example with Nayib Bukele. He's eliminating historical memory in El Salvador. in Salvador, there is no discussion of the Civil War anymore. There's no discussion of the revolutionary potentials of that moment. Now it's kind of like everyone's corrupt and Nayib Bukele is the answer. And then you guys are not following what's happening over there. It's horrible because there's so much support for him, not realizing what he's doing in the country and its relationship abroad, right? So I think most institutions are hostile to historical memory, but it's our role to continue to build that historical memory. Again, as you were just sharing, not many people, 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis, now folks don't even remember that. How are we not going to remember that? So many of our working class people got affected by that, and to this day are still living through that. So I think that reminding our folks about that. I teach about the LA uprisings, the Watts uprisings, and people are like, what's that, right? It's like, we have to have that historical memory that there has been rebellion in Los Angeles. And we have to connect to those things, right? So I think it's vital for us to do.
On the one hand, I want to say capitalism, but I don't want it to sound flip. The reason I want to say that is to make us think about how there is a rhythm and an expectation in knowledge production that is configured by the market, also configured by celebrity, configured by the market. Like, but many book publishers will have this season as if books were, stylish sandals or something. And the same thing with, I think, magazines, newspapers, whether or not they're online or physical, they come out with new editions, and you're supposed to, know what's everybody saying today. So this is not just, it's not just social media, or even primarily social media. It's how, knowledge production works in a capitalist environment, to always push the provision of the new and not like lingering with something and holding on to it and thinking about it. It always has to be the next thing. I also want to add one more thing. I think that the question is so great because we could get really specific and start naming groups like the American Holocaust Remembrance Association, which is changing the definition of anti-Semitism, and now that's picked up by Congress and in many colleges and universities.
The victims of communism, this stupid group.
Oh yeah, yes, this is ridiculous, right? Right, like, anyway, so there's a whole, like, we could have, if we had, like a chalkboard or something, we could write the list of associations that are particularly pernicious, and we should, so that we can know them and target them.
It was the corn chip comment.
Corn chip, and he's not saying anything serious. I think this might go. Now I got more. Seriously. Focus our organizing efforts really on politicizing people. Really, let's get like an exponential expansion of our base building and make sure that that base is a real base, you know what I mean, an active base. Because I think a lot of our kind of pessimism comes from this, like when we line up, nobody will be there. You know what I mean? Like, we could all go outside feeling nice and revolutionary, but tens of thousands of people in any direction won't give a fuck what we're talking about. I think you draw this kind of inspiration and confidence from really seeing the politics in mass motion, and we don't, we have to be more zealous in our pursuit of politicizing people.
One book or resource to take us home. Shout out to you for asking. Okay, so I'm going to say there's so many I could name, but I love Walter Rodney. Everybody needs to read Walter Rodney, and one of the best books to sort of get acclimated to him is Walter Rodney Speaks. It's an amazing resource. It covers a range of things. He's amazing. Check it out.
Writings by Ho Chi Minh.
I knew it.
You did. And there's also a good book too called Uncle Ho. Written, it's like a collective memoir. Right on. Huh? I don't know what we're talking about now.
Pass the mic. We got 2 minutes.
Lenin, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder.
Ooh.
Cleveland Ellie's book, No Spiritual Surrender.
Steven, take us home.
I'd say Black Reconstruction to Understand U.S. History, Gramsci's Prison Notebooks, and of course, Organized Study.